it's just it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to witness, to see men and what happens when they come together and take their armor off.
Welcome to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. I'm your host, Maritza Barone. In this show, I will introduce you to ideas, concepts, and mindsets that will open your mind to a new world of well-being and personal life growth. Through eye-opening interviews, we elevate people in the world doing amazing things for humanity and share insights that will shift you to become the happiest, healthiest, kindest, and most compassionate version of you. Hello and welcome to another episode of Things You Can't Unhear. I'd like to thank you all for listening again and again to this show. It means the world to me. Every single listen means the absolute world to me. And today's an important episode because I believe when it comes to wellbeing practices, I feel it's so heavily dominated by women. You know, you can go to any retreat or yoga class or wellness seminar or meditation event, and you'll see that the majority of people in that room are in fact females. And I often wonder what the males are doing to look after their own mental health. And the truth is, the answer for many men is not a lot, unfortunately. And due to the fact that men are generally not as open as women emotionally, it's probably men. Yes, you listening, or yes, your partner out there who need these self-care practices the most. So today I've invited the wonderful Asher Packman on the show to open the conversation about men's well-being and perhaps introduce openness and connection to the lives of more men. We'll explore well-being with men in particular and how vulnerability can actually mean strength, because for a long time, we'd been led to believe that vulnerability means weakness, and in fact, it truly does mean the opposite. So for those who don't know him, Asher is the founder and director of The Fifth Direction, which is a space that really enables its members to turn inward with meditation and movement. He's also the president of Meditation Australia and the founder of a men's circle called Warrior Within. We're going to learn more about that in this episode today. But Asher is also a regular wellbeing speaker at conferences and retreats and contributes to numerous websites and publications in the wellbeing field. And for Asher, he had a pretty significant series of events in his life that really shifted him. That includes the diagnosis of a progressive rare blood cancer, and it really led him to shift gears from what was a very successful corporate career to focus on health and well-being in a full-time capacity. So now he's a qualified mindset and leadership coach. He's also a HeartMath and Wim Hof method instructor and has qualifications as a Kundalini Yoga instructor and many, many more things across the wellbeing board. You've got a very impressive bio, Asher. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to have a conversation with you.
Oh, absolutely. And as I said to you before we hit record, your name has popped up in many of my circles. So I'm not one to ignore signs. So here we are speaking today. And even in the lead up of getting to know your story, I've just sort of spent the last few days listening to interviews that you've done with other people. And you've got such an important message to share. Especially to men out there who may be struggling and unable to open up or find a pathway to open up. So thank you for everything you are doing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I love what I do. It's an absolute honor to be of service where I can.
Yeah.
And you talked about the sort of the I guess the educating myself part of it. And really that just comes from my curious nature.
I know, I feel the same way. I feel like the more you learn, the more you need to share, because it's, you know, you obviously grow as a person so much when you're learning these new techniques, and keeping them to yourself is so difficult to do when you know how beneficial it will be to so many other people out there.
No, I think that's true. I'm also fond of saying, the more I learn, the less I know. It's so broad, and you know, you feel you go diving down these rabbit holes, and sometimes, it feels like the things that you need to know about just broadens and gets bigger.
It's so true. And I know the type of person that you have grown to become now. But what were you like as a child? How could you describe yourself as a child? Because I'm always intrigued to know if any of these types of thoughts were hinted throughout your childhood.
That's a big question. I
Mm.
like it, actually. Yeah. Um, I had two parents that seemed to have vastly different perspectives on the world, and I think I had a little bit of both in me. My mum was always very spiritual in her way, and was very big on nature and Mother Earth and all the bits. She was a Kundalini yogi herself, and whereas Dad was a pretty typical businessman, um, and teaching me kind of what I needed to do to be successful in the external world. Um, so I guess I had a little bit of both. That's the answer. I like to, you know, um, climb trees and be out in nature as much as possible and look through the eyes of my mum. But at the same time, I guess somewhat reluctantly, I was kind of looking at my future in terms of how to make my way in the world.
It looks like you've taken quite a bit from both of them, which is really beautiful. But when did the curiosity, I would say, about well-being begin for you?
Anyone who knows my mum, my mum's friends will be laughing at this. Yeah, she was very, very, very into it. So there was
You
never
grew
really
up
any
around it.
choice. There was never any choice that was going to rub off on me in some way, shape, or form. I mean, to a degree, she was quite fanatical. Actually, that it was creeping towards almost neuroticism around health and wellness. So I had to learn where to draw the line, and where to create my own, um, I guess, reality around it all.
In saying that, do you believe that we can take our well-being too far sometimes?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I think we humans, we tend to have this nature where we think if a little bit is good, then a lot must be better.
Mm.
I don't know if you've experienced that in your life, but I see people, latching on to the latest wellness, I guess, concept, and there's this sort of drive to take it as far as you possibly can.
Mm.
I can give you simple examples, like even I'm sure many of your listeners or some of your listeners might know the Wim Hof method, which is this idea of doing a lot of breathing and jumping into an ice bath. And what I find is that people tend to want to stay in the ice as long as they can and outdo one another and think that the longer they stay in, the better. And that's definitely not the case.
Yeah.
It's learning about getting in touch with your body and giving your body what it needs, and that's going to change day to day. So for example, using the ice bath analogy, like I don't use a stopwatch or anything. I just get in and listen to what my body needs, and I'm not really interested if I was in there a couple of minutes or a little bit more. It's not part of the process.
It's so true when you say that. It's very interesting. And I think people, when they're going through something in their life, they're clinging on to hope that there can be positive change out there. And they think, obviously, if the more they put into it, the more they will get out of it. But I'd love to get your personal opinion on how people grow and how people really progress in their lives. Do you feel as though, and because I know you've gone through some very difficult times in your life, which we can touch on if you feel the need to share, but do you feel as though we need to go through significant pain in order to grow?
I think that you have to lean into your discomfort. We can put it that way. I mean, how you define pain is another matter. But I think we grow through discomfort. I think, and as humans, we're kind of geared towards moving away from discomfort. We go towards things that are desirable and comfortable. As I say, using the ice bath once again, lying on the beach is lovely, but your body's not learning an awful lot. Maybe unless you get sunburnt, then there's a lesson. But in the ice bath, it's not particularly something that's comfortable, but you're learning a great deal. So yeah, I think that if you want to move forward in life, you've got to go to those places which typically your mind will resist.
I'd love to hear your personal experience throughout your career and also with your own personal life of what triggered you to move in a new pathway.
Yeah, well, now we get into the part where I'm kind of sharing a little bit about my story, which I'm more than happy to do. I think it was it was gradual to a degree, and then it was very sudden.
Mm.
So I think, let me preface this just by saying I believe that our life's path, our true life's path, is kind of out there, and when we're not living that path fully, the universe has a way of kind of giving you these subtle messages to maybe make some changes or to kind of, straighten up a little bit.
Mm.
And I believe that most of us, particularly men, we don't tend to listen to that message. And a great friend of mine, James Greenshields, refers to it as the feather, the brick, and the train. And it's this idea that, if you're not living your true purpose, the universe will start off by tickling you under the chin with a feather, and progressively the noise will get louder until, it's a train wreck. And for me, living in the corporate world and doing all these things was probably not what I was destined to do. It didn't. So for me, all the way through that, although I was successful, there was kind of this gnawing in my guts that perhaps, is this all there was? Is this, where was this leading to? Is this really what my life was about? I was unable to hold relationships down. I had a lot of things that I used to do which weren't particularly healthy, which would distract me from these feelings, spending too much time in bars and so forth. And, I guess I got that lesson from the universe really hard, in the sense that in 2007, my sister took her own life. And for me, that was a massive, massive wake-up call. And, I made some changes, but I still stuck to the corporate path for a little while. But there was definitely a shift in me when that happened. And then not so long after that, my mum, who got sick with cancer, which came back after my sister died, she made the decision to end her own suffering as well, which was very different to my sister's, but at the same time, very difficult. And shortly after that, I got diagnosed with cancer myself. So that, to me, that was kind of the train wreck. And part of that was this slow recognition, and then it all happened very quickly at the end. So I made a lot of changes. I actually ended up in a psych ward for a couple of weeks, to be truthful with you.
I think that's pretty fair, actually. I mean, that's significant pain that you had to deal with.
100%, yeah. And so I don't look at that as a failing in any sense. But I was able to come out of there with a really blank canvas, and I still had I guess a journey of wellness on my hands with the diagnosis, but I began to turn towards things like meditation and kind of more spiritual practices, and making a bigger effort to understand my body and what my body needed, and looking at food and looking at other different things. So in a sense, I really turned my whole life around. But what I realized during that process is that I really enjoyed it, that side of looking into all that stuff. And it was, again, like you said in the beginning, I realized that I wanted to actually give some of that knowledge back. And then it was that other people on similar journeys were coming and asking me questions, and I found myself in situations where I was able to help, and it just naturally led to the path that I'm on now.
It's amazing how the uncertainty of life and things that just happen to us lead us into a completely different direction. And, you are now teaching people these methods and changing people's lives in so many ways through the businesses that you run and the practices that you do. But I would love to talk more about the journey that you're still going through now with your own diagnosis, and how you are managing that from a mindset and a physical perspective.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. And for those that don't know, what I have is a rare blood cancer, which is progressive and basically incurable. So there is kind of an ongoing, there is ongoing work to do, I guess, around that. And some days are better than others. But yeah, around the mindset stuff, it's been super interesting to notice how my relationship to to, I guess, the disease has changed over time. The day I sat in front of a professional looking lady in a white coat who told me the news, it seemed like a very bad day. And in fact, I kind of laugh about it now, because I came out of Cabrini and I was walking back to my car and I really felt almost disassociated. It was such a strange feeling. Like you almost expect people to come up to you on the street and say, "Oh my God, I just heard the news." Like it was, because you still feel like you're the center of the universe, but you go outside and nothing's changed. There's the guys are doing their road work and people are walking along in a hurry, looking at their phones, and the world sort of hasn't changed, and it's almost a surprise. But I got back to my car and there was a guy writing me out a parking ticket. And I sort of, I probably said a few words, which, given everything that was going on, is probably not completely unjustified. But without even looking up, he just said, "What's the matter, mate? Having a bad day?" And it was like, wow, like straight away, I've just got to learn that nothing's changed. Not in a bad way, but just in the sense that, I'm just part of something so much bigger, and whether or not I have cancer or not is kind of irrelevant.
That diagnosis was in 2011, is that right?
Yeah, at the end of 2010, I kind of knew that something was up. Yeah.
And are you taking control of your health journey in other ways to what has been prescribed?
I mean, look, at the end of the day, I'm certainly not someone who goes out and says, Western medicine is bad and all this kind of stuff. I think there's a place for everything in the healing journey.
Absolutely.
So for me, I'm just a firm believer in you've just got to take responsibility for your own decisions, and whatever those decisions are, you've got to own them. And because at the end of the day, what works, what doesn't work, what takes you in certain directions or other directions. If you can this is my journey, I was at the wheel. I think that whatever happens, it's okay. There's kind of no one to blame. So not that you would anyway, but so for me, it's just looking at all the available information and just trying to navigate my own course. So right now, I'm not doing chemotherapy or anything like that. That doesn't necessarily. This is right now in this moment.
Yeah.
In the next moment, next week, tomorrow, things might be different. I just keep my mind, very flexible, open. I think rigidity around these situations is what causes a lot of problems. And I always like to say that certainty is the enemy of learning. I don't know. I'm just doing the best I can in the moment. And right now, this is the course of action that I'm taking. And by the way, my oncologist is not pushing these things on me at the moment, because I'm sitting in this kind of gray area with the way that my blood work is at the moment. So, she's not, basically telling me that I'm doing anything wrong at this particular stage. If it reaches a point where she's very, very serious about the fact that I should be on chemo, she'll tell me.
That's right.
And at that stage, I need to kind of rethink.
Absolutely. And, I love that you're open to exploring what your intuition is guiding you to do as well. Now, you've obviously experienced a huge amount of grief in your life over the time. What practices have helped you in the most profound ways? Because I do believe these days you teach some of these practices in something that you call death literacy. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, well, the thing that I came across initially was the practice of meditation, which I believe, really changed my life. But taking that a step further, there's mindfulness is one thing, and I think that's fabulous. This idea of, stopping in the present moment and smelling the roses, that's all terrific, fantastic, brilliant. For me, what I came across was a more heart-based practice. And this idea of kind of dropping your attention to your heart and really allowing that kind of heart wisdom to spring forth. And that was kind of a turning point for me, because I think I realized that up until that point in my life, I'd really put walls up around my heart. I'd really closed off. We can talk a little bit more about how that relates, how that can manifest into disease. But, for me, that practice of kind of heart-based meditation was really the thing. And having compassion, initially finding compassion for myself. I think I'd been really hard on myself. In fact, I don't think I really liked myself very much. Even though I was achieving great things in the corporate world, it was never enough. You know, and I'd be much more down on myself than I would actually having a bit of softness, a bit of self-love or self-compassion. So that process of working through that like helped tremendously. But in then leading on to the next part of your question around death and death literacy, the two things are very much interlinked, because if you start to bring death into your consciousness and understand that you're only here for a finite amount of time, and that, you know, the clock's ticking and you actually don't know when your time's up. In a sense, what I like to say is we're only renting our lives from the angel of death, and she can take it back whenever she likes. It actually allows for that self-compassion and compassion in general for everybody, everything on the planet to really shine through. I see death as a very, very wise teacher, which not many people are kind of taking advantage of. We tend to have this underlying denial of death. But if I can meet everybody, knowing that, you know, they're only here for a short amount of time, they're going to lose all their stuff and there's going to be suffering. How can I possibly feel anger or any of these kind of degenerating, depleting emotions for that person, in the sense that we're all in this together. We're all just travellers on the road of life.
Many of us fear death, or I think the majority of us fear death in so many ways. And we even avoid talking about it. I think talking about death makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. And I think when we raise these conversations, it does put us in ease if we just sort of start exploring it in a non-fear based way. I mean, I interviewed Debbie Malone. She's a psychic medium, and she's had 7 near-death experiences and actually physically passed for several minutes at some stage in her life. And she described that feeling as being so euphoric and so beautiful. But it's incredible that we fear that moment, that unknown area of where we will go or where we will end up or what we will feel like, that we avoid talking about it at all during the time that we are here.
I agree. I mean, I can take that a couple of different places, but it loops back to what we said at the very beginning of this conversation, and that was that we learn from places of discomfort. So if we're not looking at death, it's a reality. It doesn't matter whether you want to look at it and talk about it or not, it's going to happen.
That's the one certainty of life, right?
100%, right? So yeah, it's like by diving into that discomfort, you're going to get growth, just like we were talking about an ice bath or anything like that at the beginning of the conversation. So for me, you know, going there and facing that fear and facing whatever's in there for you around death is highly beneficial. And I think also there's a story which has been woven into the number of people that come to my death meditations, and you can see that fear has actually been implanted by the people around them, like family and friends. I remember one guy coming along, he was terrified of death, let's put it that way. But, you know, when we dug in a little bit, we found out that when he was a child, even if he was in the backseat of the car and his parents drove past a hearse, they'd be like, cover your eyes, don't look.
Wow.
You know, all this stuff. And so he that's an implanted belief. So, you know, there's work to do. Yeah.
What does a death meditation entail?
It can go a number of different ways. You'll have to come along to one of my workshops. But yeah, I mean, literally I'll guide you through a meditation where you actually kind of, you know, metaphorically speaking, die, and you just notice what comes up. And we ease into that process, like very gently and very carefully.
Is the aim to remove the fear?
Well, not necessarily, because let's face it, Maritza, like having fear around death is fairly valid. Like, I don't think the idea is to be completely not fearing of it. It's more about understanding it. I mean, this is the thing that I say to people. It's like feel the fear and do it anyway. It's a bit the same with the ice bath, because you know there's growth in there and it's a reality anyway. So, you know, I don't think there'd be too many people in the world who could genuinely say that they don't that they have zero fear about death. There's something inaccurate about that statement.
Yeah,
But it's feeling that fear and being okay with it. Maybe lessening it to a degree if it's really causing issues in your life which are unbearable. But it's working with that fear as opposed to working against it.
Interesting. Look, I want to talk deeply about men in particular and well-being, because I know in my circles and what I've seen and experienced, there's so much focus on women, and it just, whether that's intentional or whether it's women who just have more interest in well-being and yoga or meditation, for example. I know my husband recently went on his first silent retreat, and everyone else was female. He was the only male there, and he actually felt quite comfortable being around females in that situation. To be honest, I think he'd probably feel more comfortable around women in that situation than other men. But I think it's so important that we introduce the idea of well-being and health and wellness and even spirituality to men to make them feel more comfortable with exploring it. And I know you do that so much in your work. How do we make men go out of their comfort zone and take the first step into exploring some more self-love within themselves and exploring the idea of well-being?
I think if you talk to the average guy about well-being, he'd probably say that he's doing it, but it's possibly more masculine activities like lifting weights in the gym and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I have to laugh at myself because in my corporate career, I was involved in comms and marketing and PR, which is an industry which is like 85% women, and now I've moved into meditation and spiritual and yoga, which is like about the same. So maybe there's something inside me which just wants to hang out with women, but it's still
not a bad thing. Not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing. Yeah,
but yeah,
I mean,
no, but you definitely are helping a lot of men out there introduce more well-being into their lives in a more deeper way, rather than going to the gym and working out, or playing a team sport or doing things like that, where you're allowing men to connect more deeply with their emotional side, aren't you?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, this men's group that I started in 2017, which is called Warrior Within, and obviously looking at a very different side of the warrior, which is the warrior that we often see in society. It's moving away from that shadow warrior and moving into that true inward-looking, golden warrior, if you will. This one that comes from a place of love. As opposed to fear or anger or whatever else is residing in there. But what I was saying was this group actually started. It was more of a men's meditation group, nothing more, nothing less, because I wanted to give guys an opportunity to come and spend time in a space that wasn't so dominated by that feminine energy. Like what I was hearing from a lot of guys is, look, I want to get into meditation, but when I go to the yoga studio, it's invariably run by women, and there's a very feminine energy in there with the flowers and the fragrances and all, which is all fantastic, but they didn't kind of feel like they could get in touch with their inner workings as a man in that environment, and also didn't really want to be overly vulnerable in that space, and certainly not sharing their innermost feelings. And it was really successful, like right from the get-go. We had a room full of guys just saying, I've been looking for this for a long time. And it kind of built from simply just having a collective where we could just come and meditate together as a group, to actually having some direction and process about it. And the sorts of guys that were coming, the issues were all very, very similar. I mean, they came from all sorts of, all walks of life. All different parts of society, and yet there was this common denominator that ran through every single man in the room. And once we were able to tap into that, then everything just fell away. And that group, some guys that are in the Warrior Within group have been with me, and we've been together as working in this brotherhood since then, 3 years ago. But it's grown up to over a couple of hundred guys now, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to witness, to see men and what happens when they come together and take their armor off.
Oh, so true. And I hope that continues to grow for so many people out there, because I think it's so important that men bring out the emotions within them. I mean, they've always been raised majority of the time to show strength rather than vulnerability and emotion. And, just for example, I never saw my dad cry when I was a kid. I saw my mum cry all the time. And me now as a mum, I cry all the time, and my husband very rarely cries, or if he does, he doesn't do it in front of me or my kids. And, I feel as though we need to allow men that opportunity to show their emotional side without them thinking that they still aren't that strong person who they can be physically outside of that. But showing emotion can be completely accepted by all of us out there, including other men. And I think that's a big thing. I don't know. I'd love to get your perspective on that. Do you feel as though men feel judged more from other men or just from people in general?
It's a great question. Yeah, and just taking you back to what you said at the beginning there around strength and vulnerability, because and I'm not. I tend not to use the word vulnerable too much. I prefer just openness or something like that. But being open is such a sign of strength. So I think you said something in the beginning around men, they feel like they need to be strong and not vulnerable, which is kind of to me, that's kind of a little bit of an oxymoron, because being open, vulnerable, if you will, is actually the greatest sign of strength.
I
It's just
absolutely love that. I love that turn of perception that you've just done
yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that getting guys to understand that's one thing, but there's still all this conditioning, deep inside. Like, you might be able to explain it kind of logically and they get it, but there's still another question of actually doing it, because the mask, the armor's on pretty strongly with these guys, and they've operated that way all their lives, including myself, and to some degree, it's absolutely still a work in progress for myself. So. I think getting to that place, through the work that we do in the group is super important. And it's not all about having to break down and cry and do all those things. I mean, if that happens, that's great, and there should be space in a container for that to happen. It should be completely acceptable, but it doesn't have to look like that either. It can look. There's an infinite amount of ways that can look. But you said something about why will guys keep the armor on, or why will they, because they don't want to kind of look bad or whatever, and they're worrying about other men judging them. But also, a lot of men find that it's the women that judge them pretty hardly too, because and I've heard Brene Brown speak to this very, very beautifully, and it resonates very deeply with me. A lot of women out there, if they're honest with themselves, they might say to their men, you're allowed to be open, you're allowed to cry in front of me. But when they do, they're a bit repulsed by it.
It's really interesting.
Because they're looking for this man to be up on the white horse, as Brene Brown says, and the man's not allowed to fall down, because if the man falls off the white horse, well, how am I, as a woman in this partnership, going to hold things together? Like, I'm kind of expecting you to always be there and stand firm no matter what I'm going through.
That's something I think women need to explore too, if we find ourselves feeling that way. I know that I've got a friend whose wife is going through postnatal depression at the moment, and he completely feels unable to show any of his emotion, because he's really struggling to hold it together himself. But he's doing the best he can not to show that he's crumbling, so his wife and his baby can benefit from his strength, is what he calls it. He says there's no option out there for him to crumble, because he needs to hold it together for them. And I think we need to let men release what they're feeling, because it gets to a boiling point, and then things just happen that could have been avoided.
Yeah. So what about this? In that, let's take that example as something to work with. So that particular man feels as if his masculine energy needs to be in a way that he holds firm, he's stoic, he holds solid for that situation, for his wife, for his kids, and that's fine. It's part of the masculine energy to do that. But what if he came and sat in a men's circle amongst other brothers and was able to let go and surrender to all these emotions and let it all come out and do it there in that setting, so that then when he returns home, he's able to kind of, keep doing what needs to be done, like the warrior inside him keeps moving forward, keeps doing exactly what needs to be done. But now he's got an outlet, and this is what happens. These guys, they come into these circles and find this place where they can truly be themselves, maybe for the first time in their lives. And what so many men say to me is, I didn't realize how much I craved being around other men and being seen, being seen as who I really am, rather than this role I'm playing in life, like as a brother or a father or a colleague or a husband or whatever, which is, it's you, but it's not really you. And this is why so many men crumble, because if you lose touch with who you really are and adjust these roles, when one of these roles is taken away, like a divorce, or you lose your health, or you lose your job, then you feel like you've lost everything. And these men then, start to resort to suicide. And that's why, we have such high suicide rates for men in this country versus women, although that's another interesting conversation. Because if you add in suicide attempts, we're about the same.
Wow.
Yeah, and I often hear, a lot of noise around, 3/4 of the suicides in this country are men. But I'm like, yeah, but, let's look at getting to that place of feeling suicidal, which is possibly more important, or at least as important. Then gender doesn't have a role, then we're all the same. It's about the same.
It's interesting when you hear the stats of women need to speak 20,000 words a day and men need to speak 5,000 words a day in order to feel heard. And I think choosing what those words are is so critical to our health and our well-being, in my perspective. What you're doing is so instrumental for men and their health. So I really commend you in doing that. And as I said earlier, I hope it grows. And I hope men who are listening to this today, or women who have men in their lives that are listening to this today, can introduce this to them and invite them to go and experience a men's circle, or introduce them to potentially other men who would open up together and start a conversation together and a connection. I'd love to know. I know you're a parent as well. You've got a 5-year-old, is that right?
I do. You've done a lot. You've done your homework.
Yeah, I have. Well, I did. I actually stalked your Instagram earlier, and I saw the most beautiful poem that you had shared when your son started school recently. And I want to know whether you bring what you do into your parenting as well. But I'd love to read this poem out first so people can listen to it. Do you mind if I share the words from William Martin that you put on your Instagram page?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. Do not ask your children to strive for extraordinary lives. Such striving may seem admirable, but it is the way of foolishness. Help them instead to find the wonder and the marvel of an ordinary life. Show them the joy of tasting tomatoes, apples, and pears. Show them how to cry when pets and people die. Show them the infinite pleasure in the touch of a hand, and make the ordinary come alive for them. Let the extraordinary take care of itself. So, so beautiful. I actually copy and paste that into an email and sent it to my husband before. And, as a parent, that just makes you choke up, because you think it can be so simple when we put it in a perspective like that. Do you bring that into your everyday parenting life, all of these things that you have learned?
Look, I do my best. I mean, like all parents, I trip up, and then I apply a lot of guilt to that, which I try not to do.
I hear you.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, look, that's the thing, and it's really interesting for me, particularly with my health situation. I don't know how much, none of us do really, but I guess it just puts an extra, underlines it a little bit more for me. Not knowing how much time you have left with your child, and even you don't know what how the arc of their life is going to pan out either. And it's just basically being as fully present with my son in every moment to the best of my ability. And as I said, that can look messy and it's not always perfect, but the intent is there, and I absolutely love all the time that I get to spend with Jack, which is actually quite a lot because of the nature of my work. You know, Jack's mum and I are not together, but we just live literally less than 100 meters apart. You know, and we have a relationship that works pretty well for him. And I really honor that. But in a sense, you know, as when I'm with Jack, it's just he and I a lot of the time. So I really get to sort of understand him, and I really feel like we have a really special relationship.
I think you'll probably have a wonderful young man on your hands through all of the teachings that you are offering to other men. You get to raise a man of your own from the very beginning. So that's sort of exciting, don't you think?
And terrifying. And we all know how that feels as a parent. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. And, you know, I see both his mum and him as gurus for me. You know, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, you know, his mum and I are no longer together, you know, for reasons, but at the same time, that's where so much teaching and so much learning has been for me. It's like, even with family, I mean, I remember Ram Dass saying, if you think you're enlightened, you know, go and spend a week with your family. And it's like, sometimes, you know, showing up and all the work that you've done, you know, it's the people that are closest to you that often kind of shine the light on areas that still need work. And my son does that to me. He's just a beautiful little guru without even knowing it.
Oh, so beautiful. I know I've asked you a lot of big questions today, and I apologize for that, but you have been so amazing at answering them so beautifully. And I have one last question for you, and it is a big one, but it is really around the collective and what your biggest hopes are for humanity. I feel like at the moment, the world is in a very strange place. So much going on around the world. And I feel like there is a shift with people at the moment too, trying to really connect within themselves a lot more. But if you were to be asked that question, which you are right now, what are your biggest hopes for humanity?
Well, you know, let me put it this way. I think we've talked a lot about this idea of growing from being in discomfort, and the universe will give you the lesson at the level that you need to hear it. Well, that is also happening at a collective consciousness level as well. And I think that humanity, all of us, you, me, every single person on the planet right now, is going through a collective rite of passage. And we, you know, I'm big on talking about rites of passage with the men, you know, from boyhood to manhood, and how there needs to be this kind of process of initiation. I really, really fiercely believe that this is what's happening at a collective level for humanity right now. And if you think about it in Australia, well, you know, trial by fire. You know, and fire is also, you know, very symbolic in many ways. You know, for example, the Roman word focus actually means sacred fire. And so for me, it's kind of been a bit of a mantra of mine from the beginning of the year when all these fires started to play out. It's about, you know, whenever I see all this stuff, you know, reading in the papers or whatever, it come back to focus, you know, and this idea of this sacred fire. So yeah, for me, you know, my hopes are is that, you know, we move through this rite of passage collectively, and come out the other side having learnt from this period of discomfort, and you know, becoming collectively, I guess, enlightened through the process. And what awaits could be blissful and wonderful if we're able to successfully navigate these difficult times.
I know I promised that was the last question, but if you could speak to yourself 10 years ago and to men who may be in that position of where you were at 10 years ago to kickstart a well-being adventure or a journey, what would you say to someone in that position?
If I was to say something to myself from 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it would be, stop taking everything so seriously. You know, I just was too invested in the seriousness of life and needing these things to come together and all to work in a certain way for me. And I just needed to just lighten up, you know, and just trust in the process and trust in something bigger than me. Even if I can't see the answers, I can't see how I can get from here to there. Just trust in the process, and along the way, just be lighter. Laugh more, and don't take everything so seriously.
I'm Maritza Barone. Thank you for listening to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. I'd love to keep the conversation going. Let us know what you thought of this episode, and if something really profound came up for you that you want to share, let's talk about it. You can find me on Instagram at Things You Can't Unhear, or on my personal page at Maritza_Barone. And if someone you know will benefit from something that was said in this show, make sure you share it with them too. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and keep up to date with what's next. And if you can spare a few seconds, please rate and review the show on iTunes, just so other people can find us more easily and quickly. And as always, my friend, be happy, be healthy, be conscious, and be kind.